The Joe Rogan Experience.
Did you see that article I sent you about the USADA corruption?
Yes. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so basically, and this was like a WADA press release too, so it's not like it was some journalist or something. It's like on the official WADA site, and they were basically exposing how USADA was covering up test results. So
For which athletes?
Unnamed. As
Which
far
sports?
As, they wouldn't say. They just said like Olympic level athletes and elite athletes, and kept it very vague.
Really?
And essentially, they disclosed what they had tested positive for, and even that one of them was an Olympic caliber athlete, and their entire career they got to go until retirement without getting exposed, just because they helped USADA supposedly catch other people.
Oh, they were narcs?
So like, yeah, so if you help them catch people, then you could get away with using like full board testosterone, EP.
No, really?
Yeah.
Oh my God! So they're like a drug dealer that works for the government.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and this was like one of the reasons of many why like Hunter and others are very critical of USADA and are glad they're not under it anymore.
Well, there's a lot of stupidity with their regulations. Like one of them is BBC 157, which is natural in the human body. You know, and peptides, all they're doing is helping you heal.
Yeah.
You're literally dealing with a sport where you beat the fucking shit out of each other every day in training. And you're not going to like assist these people in healing? Like, wouldn't that only benefit everybody? There's no like fear of like harm. There's like no one's dying from BBC 157. Within the code, there's a provision whereby an athlete who provides substantial assistance can subsequently apply to have a proportion of their period of ineligibility suspended. Wow, look how they phrased that. What dirty language. Proportion of their period of ineligibility suspended. What does that mean? It means you're allowing them to cheat. However, there's a clear process for that, which does not involve allowing those who have cheated to continue to compete while they may or may not gather incriminating information. Wait a minute. What are you saying then? So it doesn't do that. They're saying it doesn't do that.
Well, at the bottom, WADA is now aware of at least 3 cases where athletes who had committed serious anti-doping rule violations were allowed to continue to compete for years while they acted as undercover agents.
Okay, so they pretended that they wouldn't let someone compete if they were doping, but they still did.
Yeah,
Is that essentially
while they were on shit.
Wow. Imagine if that's like boxing in the Olympics or something like that. The athlete was allowed to line up against their unknowing competitors as if they had never cheated. In that case, when USADA eventually admitted to WADA that what had been going on, it advised that any publication of consequences or disqualification of results would put the athlete's security at risk. What? And asked WADA to agree to non-publication. What?
Yeah.
Were they worried about that with Lance Armstrong? What the fuck are you talking about? Security at risk. In another case of a high-level athlete, USADA never notified WADA of its decision to lift an athlete's provisional suspension, which is an appealable decision, despite being required to do so under the code. Had WADA been notified, it would have never allowed this. Wow, interesting.
And it sounds like this was somewhat how they operated, as if they had a high profile enough person or certain circumstances, they would kind of autonomously decide, hey, if you work alongside us to catch other people because you might know something that we don't or what have you, then we'll just let you, no one will know.
That's so dirty. So dirty. That's literally contrary to the whole reason why they exist.
Yeah.
What's really crazy is, according to the UFC, so what happened was the UFC had some disputes with them and decided to sever their relationship. And then USADA publicly said that UFC is going to allow their competitors to do steroids now, which is not the case at all. They already had a contract in place with Drug Free Sport. I talked to the guy from Drug Free Sport, and he was essentially laying out the it was essentially identical. No BPC 157, no testosterone growth, nothing. You can't do anything.
The standards are actually much higher now, too, in contrast. USADA would claim, or at least suggest, that they were doing full spectrum bulletproof testing, but it turned out they were almost never EPO testing. The HGH testing was never really done, and then also the isoform, the isotope ratio mass spec was not really being done either.
Was that a budget thing? It was too expensive to do those tests?
I believe so, and also time intensive. for some of these tests as well. And I guess for like the number of tests they were conducting, perhaps it was too extensive, or I don't really know what the exact motivation was. Like often you would think it comes down to budget and time, but also if you have an expert who just thinks it's not warranted to go further, like the same way if you went to a doctor and you'd be like, should I test this? They'll be like, oh, if we know this, like who cares? It's not necessary. Like I don't necessarily know they went to the depth and rigor to claim somebody did or didn't cheat if I have, preliminary data that you would exclude having to go further. Like sometimes you don't have to, test further if there's not an atypical finding. So
yeah, but like if they're not testing for EPO, for example, and maybe there's an event in Mexico City, right, which is 7,700 feet above sea level. That place is brutal. That's where Cain Velasquez, who was known as like probably the greatest cardio heavyweight of all time, he fought Fabricio Verdum and he did not prepare properly. Fabricio actually moved to the mountains above Mexico City and trained there for like 4 months. So Fabricio, who speaks fluent Spanish, lived in Mexico, he was really got ready, and he beat Cain Velasquez in that night to become the champion. And he had tremendous cardio, and Cain was just dying. That's how brutal Mexico City is. So imagine when you're competing at that altitude, or maybe Colorado Springs, or one of these like really high altitude places, which we have events, Salt Lake City, and you don't test for EPO.
Yeah, no,
that's
insane.
Crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy, because that's the place where you would do it, particularly if like you're defending your title or you're challenging for a title.
Yeah, and it's like some of this stuff, even if you're looking for it, is quite difficult to detect anyways. Like microdosing EPO is still, they're trying to refine the parameters and determine with greater scrutiny how to detect it. And
how long is the life it's detectable inside your body?
I believe it's like a few days, and that's if you're using that's not a microdose protocol either.
Well, how much of a benefit do you get from microdosing?
Fairly significant, given you can even just retaining your baseline parameters if you're weight cutting can be quite helpful. So it's almost like offsetting, for example, the suppression of hormones or the suppression of like any sort of parameter that would decrease with heavy nutrient deprivation. If you can sustain it at normal, is performance enhancing in contrast to your competitors who are also weight cutting and might not have the same advantages.